Back at it again, boys, with more of the fresh content you crave. It's me,
KHANTEHNT,
BGE, and Digibro, who I think is on this side, but we'll figure that out in post. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back.
It's going great. We watched the first 5 episodes of another new anime show called Babylon. People have been telling me to watch this one. I was getting a bunch of people like, oh, this is one of the unexpected greats of the season. You got to check it out. And I must say, it was well above my expectations. This show is great. That's my first impression.
Great. I will definitely say massively above my expectations. I knew nothing about the show. Is this based on something? I have no idea. Is this more gacha mystery police procedural stuff? Probably not. Maybe. It's good. I mean, I've been enjoying it a lot. I'll say this though. There's a certain point up to which I was like being a little bit nitpicky. I was like, okay, I get it. This is a mystery. There's policemen. We're researching a thing. I'm like, these details are okay, but there's a couple little things that strike me as a little bit imprecise, like a little bit less detailed than I would want in something like this. But then at the end of episode 3, everything changes, and I'm like, I'm in. I am totally in. And been loving it ever since.
This is the kind of show. It's going to be really hard to talk about this without getting into spoilers.
Surely we have to do spoilers at some point. Yeah,
we're going to have to give like a quick spoiler-free review of this, I think, just to get people interested. Because like I'm going to say outright, you should watch this show. It's extremely interesting.
Yes,
it's definitely not like anything else I've seen. Like it has elements of... I guess you could call it like a police procedural to some degree. Like the main character is not actually a cop. He is a prosecutor attorney.
Yes. Yes.
Working for
he does
the
a lot of field work for a prosecuting attorney, but hey, sometimes it happens.
It's hard to tell if prosecuting attorney means the same thing in this story.
That's exactly what I was wondering. If in Japan it's
different.
I don't know.
He's borderline an internal affairs guy, essentially. I mean, he ends up investigating internal affairs through the course of this show.
Yeah.
But it immediately begins as a show about basically political sex trafficking.
Yes.
How it starts, which was already something I was like, wow. First of all, haven't seen this really covered in anime.
Yeah.
With a strong sense of seriousness. The show is definitely a like political thriller. This is not a show that is for people who can't keep up with like lots of different factions and legal terminology. It's a show for adults in like a way that you rarely get, like in the same way as Standalone Complex.
I was just gonna say, of all the shows in the world, the ones that it reminds me of the most are, at first it reminded me of Law and Order. It reminds me a little bit of like David Fincher police procedural films, but most of all, the show number one in my mind as I watch this is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex.
Right.
With the same kind of technical jargon you see watching that show is exactly in here, and the same kind of, like we say that like sex trafficking, is pretty rare. I know one show that explores that in the context of like cybernetic bodies and robots and all that stuff, but it absolutely comes up in Ghost in the Shell, which at its core is a police story with cyborgs. But
I saw a lot of people comparing this show to Psycho Pass, and
sure,
I get that on some level in that it is, again, like a police procedural, but like Psycho Pass is very focused on its sci-fi concept of and like being an action thriller. Like Psycho Pass is super violent, and that's a very big part of the show. It ultimately culminates into big, crazy scenes of violence, and while there is violence in this show in a way, because there's been a lot of suicide and murder. It's not the same. It's not like shock value fun violence. Even I would say even less so than Ghost in the Shell. Like the Ghost in the Shell TV show is a fun show full of like jazzy music and high energy chase scenes and stuff. This show's not like that. It's very much political thriller. I've never seen like 24. I don't know if this is along those lines. It's just like there's a lot of very serious talk of dudes like trying to solve like real crimes, and it's not really fun or funny. it's exciting because the implications of what's happening are actually so serious.
It's like reading a really detailed mystery novel is like the closest thing. Yeah. And honestly, I have seen 24. I've watched many seasons. I've watched Law and Order. I've watched a million different police shows. And I'm telling, above all, this show reminds me the most of Standalone Complex. Above all other medium. It's the thing that
Standalone Complex is the only thing I can think of that is so dense with not only using like every different aspect of society in its storytelling, like really diving into like how do governments actually work? How does politics actually work? And granted, this show sets up a really fantastical political system eventually.
Hey man, I'll buy anything as long as it writes a good story. And so far, I am totally on board with this. I could see this happening, sometime.
It's mega interesting, and I'll say that the original, this is based on a novel series.
Okay, there you
written
go.
By the
Makes
same.
sense.
The novels are written by the guy who wrote the screenplay for the anime Kato, which came out in 2017. And Kato is a show that the first half of it is about this like alien who comes to Earth and has to deal with the governments of Earth. And the first half of the show is super interesting and deals with a lot of like big concepts. And then the second half is, in my opinion, total dog shit and just goes completely off the rails into fantastical nonsense. So like I am cautious a little bit with my optimism over this show, but the first half of this is even better than the first half of Kato was.
Well, that's
the guy who's actually the guy who's actually writing the anime script is somebody who has no other credits to their name. But the main reason I think people are comparing it to Psycho Pass is that the director directed Psycho Pass 2, or he co-directed Psycho Pass 2, which sucked. And he also directed the third season of Fooly Cooley, which I never even bothered getting to because I hated the second season so much.
Makes sense.
So,
I'll get to it one day.
I can't speak for the track record of everybody working on this show, but this show is great. It's also by Studio Revo Root, which I know nothing about.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, they did something, like, I recognize that, like, motorcycle thing at the beginning, the little plug they do. I saw some other show they had done, but I can't remember what it is now.
No, the funny thing is, that motorcycle thing, I think that's tied, so if anybody has seen what we're talking about, when you start the episodes, there's a scene of these guys on motorcycles, and it says the name of the studio on their back. Yeah. I've seen at least 4 different studios.
What if that's a stock video thing that you can attack your... What? That you could, like, attack your company logo to, and they'll put it on the back of these bikers? That can't be right.
I think it's a time slot. Because the Noitami the time slot does that. So I think there's some kind of time slot that for whatever reason shows the studios on I have to do more research on this.
Okay, that would make some sense. It'd be like a Toonami block. You get what's-his-face introducing you. Well, let me just say, I have not seen Psycho Pass, meaning to for a million years, but it sounds like while Psycho Pass seems to use its sci-fi concepts to do the things you want to, that you were saying it does, and even Ghost in the Shell, obviously, to a huge extent, is the premise is based on the existence of cyborg brains, cybernetics, and whatnot. Like, this show is, like, rooted, it shares, like, the best things that I love about Ghost in the Shell, in that all that sci-fi shit, what is sci-fi? Who gives a fuck about robots? Not me. What I care about is the implications on the psychology of man, and that this show is doing a deep dive. I mean, I don't know where it's going to go, but right now, I just feel like we're doing the thing I love most about a show. We're going all in on the concept, in this case, of death and suicide, and we're just diving in as hard as we can from all these. Once we get to episode 3, it's like there's going to be a debate coming up in like the next episodes, and I don't want to spoil things, but I'm just saying that like that is the psychological concept that we are like man's relationship with death and suicide and what we owe to our society. And I love hearing. I am so fucking excited for like the next couple of episodes to hear what is said. It's that intellectual content I'm always looking for. I'm like a fucking broken record. I cannot wait to hear these characters debate like their relationship and the responsibilities, the merits versus the counterpoints. Because I think you and I would both agree that while suicide, when you just hear about it like on its own, it sounds like a bad thing. But even the characters in the show, they're like, well, I mean, sometimes euthanasia is appropriate when like a person's dying anyway. I mean, all these things are going to be explored to some degree, and I cannot fucking wait.
For clarification, if anybody hasn't seen this show at all yet, and you don't know what we're talking about, like, I think that it's possible the show is going to explore a bunch of different individual topics.
Very likely.
Such as
very
this,
likely.
In a similar way. But, like, even that is practically background element to this plot. It's very difficult to describe the plot without getting into any spoilers, so I'm going to do some light ones right now. So if you don't want to know anything, just go ahead and watch this show, because like
it's worth your time
really
already.
does. It stacks plot twists in such a way where, like, I am constantly shocked. Like, every episode has had something in it that was like, whoa. Like, this radically changes your perception of what's going on.
I really thought that the initial mystery was going to be all there was. Like, so-and-so died. We're going to spend the rest of these 12 episodes figuring out how. But no, that was just the drop in the bucket. And frankly, we're not even, like, fixated on the moral implications of that. We're, like, spiraling off into all these other directions. Yeah. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
It's very, very dense. And it the scale continually increases as well, where like it starts off seeming like we're just following this one guy as he investigates this case, but then it quickly becomes that the entire city is wrapped up in this thing. And so the minor spoiler I'm going to start with, if you haven't been sold yet, is that because, and the reason I consider this a spoiler is just that it's not revealed until like episode 2 or 3 where the show takes place. Because as far as you can tell, it just seems to take place in Tokyo, but it actually takes place in a city called Shinichi, which is a new metropolis built just north of Tokyo, and they're trying to decentralize Japan's focus on Tokyo as the population center. So they've built this new city, but the concept of this new city is that it is going to be a testing ground for nations. And so they've made it so it's extremely easy to pass basically any law in this country. However, because, it's a democracy, even though it's easy to pass laws, it's also easy to get rid of them, I guess. So, so the early part of the show centers around this election that's going on to elect the first mayor of this city. And once that first mayor is elected, spoilers again, now's your chance to, from now on it's just going to be spoiler discussion. We can't talk about the show without spoilers. It's so fucking hard. Just go watch it. It sounds interesting to you.
It's a mystery, but
but the first guy who gets elected as mayor immediately declares that suicide is now legal, and he's going all in on trying to convince people that having suicide be legal would be a good thing for this culture going forward. Meanwhile, the main character is trying to figure out if this guy is, because he has these 60 people jump off of a building as soon as he announces his plan. So now suicide is not only legal, you can kill yourself any way you want, fucking jump off a building, whatever. It's very dramatic, and he seems to be inciting suicide. And so, but because of the way that the new laws work, they cannot arrest him for inciting suicide. They must find out if he's actually connected to the initial wave of suicides, and that's sort of where the mystery currently is in the show.
Right.
But even getting to that point took us through so many different, like, revelations and unraveling of plot points that, like, I feel like I'm skipping the first whole 2 episodes by even describing the show that way.
You are. Let's just, like, one point is that, so the first mystery that's introduced is where we're told about the mayoral election, and we don't know who's going to win. And, like, the first thing that we discover is that, oh my God, I think that there might be, like, corruption going on, because we see like a woman involved with some of the political affiliates of these guys. Or rather, the first thing that happens is they go to investigate that professor guy who died, right? That's the very first thing that happens.
He's I think a leader of a pharmaceutical company or something.
Yeah, shit, I can't remember how they found that guy at the beginning. They went there for a reason, but I can't remember
I'm definitely
why.
going to rewatch all these 5 episodes. Just to get my head fully around everything. Because, again, the scope of the story starts off so small that you don't even realize you're not in Tokyo at the start. Like,
that's true.
It really wants to paint it as just like, we're just investigating these politicians, and it's only when we need to know that it takes place in Shinichi that we learn all that.
Well, that's true. And that kind of parceling out of information is essential to story structure and to keep us entertained as readers, or as viewers or whatever. But let me just say that when that first mayoral, so we're in spoilers right now, so it's okay if I say this. Yeah. Go watch the first 5 episodes, whatever. As we're digging into, like, this professor died. Oh, he appears to have connections to one of the political candidates. This is like 2 weeks before the election happens. I'm thinking right now, oh, this is going to be the entire plot, like preparing for the election. This is going to dominate the whole narrative. So that guy's dead. We're investigating him and like his contacts. Like there was a butler or whatever who was visited him right before he died. A woman was there as well. We're looking into this. We find out there's connections to the election officials, some people running and whatnot. We find that woman, or a woman, is being like given to some of these political influencers and so it looks like the scale is women are being like sex is being used in order to influence these elections to just win the mayorship of Shinichi. But like as soon as we find out that like there's something going on there, we immediately, like at the end of episode 2, I believe, we are just straight up fucking shown that that the guy running for mayor is actually in cahoots with the police captain or with the prosecutor, I don't know, attorney general or whatever, who's working over our main character who we thought was a good guy. And we're like, oh no, everyone's a bad guy. But then it's immediately revealed that, well, actually, no, those guys weren't related to the deaths that have happened. It's actually totally separate. But it's true, they were actually rigging the elections, but they say it's for good purposes, not for bad. And it's this whole, like, who did what and what's good and what's bad. And what I love about this is, you've often said, Digi, that what you hate about, like, quote-unquote mystery shows is that they give you only information at, like, convenient times for them, and they string you along with answers that you could have gotten any time, and by the time you get the answer, it's like the end of the series, and you've wasted a ton of time. What I see this show doing differently is this show continually is giving you specific answers to the questions you have, but the thing about those answers is, one, they're totally satisfying and you feel like, okay, good, the show has delivered on its promises, but then that in that answer, a huger, bigger mystery is revealed, packaged in that answer. So at the same time, you're satisfied and continually intrigued with what the fuck else is going on to have motivated these things, and it feels great. It just feels great.
It's difficult to even get into what makes the writing in the show so good, but like, it's I was thinking about the fact that this is one of the few shows where part of the mystery is in that realizing that less of it is a conspiracy than first thought. That, like, in most shows, it's about there is some kind of arc mastermind who is operating absolutely everything behind the scenes. And it's just about untangling this mess of clues and conclusions until you figure out who it is. In this show, it starts off seeming like that is what's the case, but then it turns out that the reason the situation is so complicated is because everybody is operating independently.
There's all these different factions, absolutely.
Right, they have their own goals, and it's when they splinter off that it truly becomes like, okay, well, now we need to understand why that person is acting differently from everybody else's plan.
Yep.
A great example of this being, so, it turns out that the guy who was, like, the leading candidate for mayor, who's, like, an older politician, and the youngest guy who's running for mayor were, like, the two forerunning candidates. They're, like, the ones that the eyeballs are on. And it was really funny because the way they're presented really reminded me of, like, Joe Biden and Buttigieg.
Sure. I see it.
Because, like, Buttigieg is, like, that kind of... He's a young dude who worked for the McKinsey Corporation, which is a group that's very similar to this Shinichi group that they're talking about in the show. Like, he has similar kind of connections to, like, a group of influential minds that, like, helps to steer corporations and government officials, essentially. His character is very similar. If Buttigieg won, it would be a perfect one-to-one parallel of this, in my mind.
We'll see if it happens.
But in any case... he becomes, like, it turns out that the older candidate is deliberately pushing the younger one. Like, he doesn't want to win. He thinks the younger candidate will be a better symbol for the city because it's supposed to be, like, about this new era and this new generation.
He's creating a puppet, like, basically, to be manipulated by him and his cohorts. That's the plan.
Exactly. And everybody's, I mean, the younger guy is in on that as well, seemingly. But... then when he makes his first law, this big suicide plan, it seemingly catches those people all off guard.
This was not part of the plan. This is not what's supposed to be happening right now. It's a totally independent agent that's just come in to introduce this crazy element. And it's great. And what a shock that was. Episode 3.
Yeah, and they're all, like, trying to catch him, but at the same time, they can't arrest him if they get him because he hasn't technically broken the law.
That is the... Okay, this is what I absolutely love about this writing, okay? It's so easy to write, like, a murder mystery or whatever, where you've just got, like, an evil murderer or, like, a monster. Okay, But just think about the complexity of what's going on. Like, you must have seen the show, or like, I'm gonna try to make it make sense, even if you haven't seen it. But it's okay. So the first person who dies is that doctor guy who was researching some like some agent, that some anesthetic that it's turned out is to be for like intentional suicide, for assisted suicide or whatever.
Yeah, it's a drug they're developing that makes you sleep and not wake up.
Right.
You will never. It blocks whatever would cause you to wake up, so you will die in your sleep.
So at the beginning, it looks like he's commits suicide. They assume that this is, or they're researching to see if this is a murder, perhaps. But it's interesting to note that like everything about his death would be consistent with a suicide, and he's smiling as he's dead. Now, of course, our main character, Zen Seizaki, his partner, also commits suicide, like, as they're doing this investigation. Yeah. And, of course, this is the big trigger for, now it's personal, baby. I gotta get to the bottom of this. It's one of us who's been taken. But, and as we progress, we assume these are murders, we assume these are bad things, but this is actually, it seems to be revealed that all of these deaths are literal suicides, as in these people chose to die intentionally. They wanted to do it. As we see when all those people hurl themselves off the top of that building. And what the show is trying to get to, clearly, is, because all the discussion about this, everything is about, like, that mayor is going to do a debate in order to decide amongst the people, not by forcing anyone, but by asking people and making an argument. Do people have the right to commit suicide or not? It's an examination of this core concept of if you have a right to live or die, and if someone convinces you to kill yourself, is that like an evil action to do? I mean, it's this whole tangle of not just evil intentions, but an examination of what rights do we fundamentally have as human beings over our own very lives, and do we have the right to take it from ourselves or not? What do we owe to the world, to each other, to society? And I just think that's such a great debate to have, because the point on it is just, it's not about forcing people to do anything. It's about, do we have the right to allow people to act even in a self-destructive manner? Because we see the negative of this too when we see that video made by that one kid who just posted online on YouTube or whatever. He's just crying like, my dad, now that this law's been passed, wants to kill himself. I'm telling him, like, I don't want him to go, but it's legal and I can't stop him. Could someone please help us? Someone please don't let this happen. And I mean, you know, it's just a real debate to have. It's all about autonomy. It's all about the human mind. It's not about putting a gun to someone's head and forcing them to do anything. And it's exactly what I want to hear. It's exactly good shit.
If there's one way that this show is similar to Psycho-Pass, like a big part of the ending of Psycho-Pass is about this idea of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and like whether, like, what is really important. Is it about like protecting people as absolutely as possible, or is it about giving them the means to a good life while they're alive, you know? And this show seems to ask the question, what is justice? That's like the central question at the heart of the show. What is, you know, different people have their own definitions of justice.
Our main character's name is like literally like good man justice, like in Japanese. That's it's great.
So it's all about him trying to ask himself, like, what is true justice? Whose side am I really going to be on? Like, is it more about protecting the greater good or the individual?
He himself breaks laws fairly frequently in his investigations. There's lots of policemen do as they're doing little shit. You see it all the time, stuff like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this brings up, right in the first episode, there's already a really interesting scene where, so our main character has this partner in the first episode who, they have found out that this woman is being traded amongst these powerful people, these mayoral candidates, and she's seen going into a hotel with one of them. And so the assistant who's tailing them, calls the main character and is like, they've gone into this hotel. We have to, like, do a sting operation. We have to, like, stop them before he fucks this woman, basically.
Right.
And main character guy is like, I understand why you want to go in there and, like, stop this from happening, but you have to consider this woman's already been getting traded around. They've been getting away with this. They have, like, means to to fuck with us. So, like, if we bust in, there's a chance they're going to come up with some kind of reasoning for what they were doing, and you know, we won't get any more out of it. But if you wait till afterwards and we interview the girl, there's a chance that we'll actually learn some more truths. So he basically kind of talks his assistant out of doing what in his mind is the right thing, by convincing him that, you know, there's this other greater justice worth pursuing. So the assistant like agrees to that. He assumably follows the girl home, but then he sends our main character a text basically like, you know, it's only been 2 years, I'm sorry, whatever. And the main character shows up at the apartment and his partner has been suicided. So right away, we have to ask ourselves the question, like, was this a suicide or not? Because it very well could have been believably in the story. Like, if this man had come to realize just how much injustice he had to, like, ignore in order to do his job, or, like, you know, maybe whatever this woman had told him had happened to her drove him to suicide, you know, like, initially we have no idea, and the show deliberately wants us to have no idea, but then it does eventually, like, none of the characters are convinced. They're all like, I don't think this dude would kill himself, even if this is a depressing situation. Like, he's a better man than that. He would, I just don't think he would have done it. So they're investigating with the possibility that it was a homicide. But then we discover that this woman is herself some kind of transforming person, possibly?
To some degree. I'm not sure.
She has some kind of mystery.
Yeah, clearly.
It turns out that she can assume all these different identities, and she may have personally been responsible for all of the 60 people who committed suicide by jumping off of the building. They're trying to investigate that.
At the very least, they know there are connections to the main ones we know. She was in the room with their fellow cop, Okido, whatever. She had visited the guy who hanged himself in his room, Fumio or whatever, and she had visited the professor guy who killed himself too. And
she seems to have some kind of well, we'll talk about it later because they talk about it in episode 5 that she has like these mysterious powers of manipulation, essentially, and also potentially she has the suicide drugs on her. Whatever the case is, she is making people kill themselves. That much is clear.
Seems to be.
She is responsible for this, and she is just this incredibly deceitful, evil woman, as the main character calls her at one point. But like, her involvement is like almost this weird background element to the whole plot where like you know, whether or not she did lead all these people to suicide will tell us whether or not the mayor is an evil man who did this, you know, through deceitful means or not.
This is the question.
But ultimately his purpose was just to create this grand social statement, I guess. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of... I'm, like, trying to even organize all the thoughts and remember what I'm even trying to say. Just processing how much shit is going on in this storyline.
I mean, let's talk more about Ai. I forget his name is, like, M, but it's Ai, and Ai, of course, means love. You'd know that if you watched my BGE Japanese lesson on the Best Guy Ever channel, so go watch that. It's the first word you learned, the first 2 letters of the Japanese alphabet. So Ai. She's introduced early on under a pseudonym. At the first, it looks like various women are effectively being pimped out to these mayoral candidates and their constituents and whatnot. But it is later revealed that it seems to all be the work of one woman who just has this magnetic personality. At first, we assume it's her magnetic pussy, but it also seems to be implied that no, she doesn't even need to fuck them. She's just able to do this with like an allure she just has in her person somehow. And of course that's involved in getting people to commit suicide. Is this something she can just talk them into? I mean, she is arrested in conjunction with one of these murders and interrogated by our boy Seizaki. And in that interrogation, she gives up nothing. No information is gleaned of any use to it. And meanwhile, she's pushing back hard against Seizaki, asking personal questions and saying that she'll confess, she'll tell him whatever he needs to know. So she's learning about him. And so it creates this veil where, so of course, she escapes after this, seemingly by casting some kind of sexual spell over, like, the cop who was watching her at the time, who doesn't seem to remember anything. And so now it creates this terrifying effect over the rest of the narrative that she's had one-on-one, like, conversations with our main character. Did something happen in there that's later going to be a trigger? Is there going to be some sort of manipulation involved? And you see other characters be like, bro, you talk to her? Are you okay? Are you feeling like suiciding yourself at all? And, the shoe's probably going to drop on that at some point. Except, notably, like, her name is Ai, meaning love. His name, like, means justice. Presumably, it's going to be the clash of, like, these two forces represented by these two characters. I don't know, like, her ability to manipulate sexually and his commitment to justice. And by the way, I don't know if this is implying anything, but he has a wife and child at home who we see call on the phone a few times, but we not one time do we actually see him either go there.
I completely forgot that he had a wife and kid.
He does
mention having a kid.
He calls her, like,
in the first
twice
episode.
throughout all these 5 episodes. But, I mean, we see Ai, and we know how attractive she is, how sexually provocative she is.
I literally forgot.
Well, there you go.
Which is especially funny because so much focus has been put on his new partner. Okay, so...
A lot of attractive women around this guy. I'm just saying. Things can happen.
Yeah, and... Well, this show is great at developing red herrings and leaving you with questions that, like you said, it's actually willing to answer your questions, but they lead to further questions. Although sometimes they can also just end a line of questioning, but at a point where you don't need it.
As long as I'm satisfied, I don't give a fuck either way. It's great. It's all good.
It's so unexpected because so many shows want to just create as many mysteries as possible and leave all the threads down.
Man, I could spot a lazy mystery a fucking mile away, and it's when a character just like I don't know, this is like in Japanese writing or something, a character will just like use like a generic pronoun. I mean, it's kind of that thing where there's like, it's time to use that. It's time to use it.
Exactly.
Like, no one in America would ever talk that way under any circumstances, as far as I know.
No,
At the very least, they'd use
that's just
different.
cheesy writing. It's not a Japanese thing. It's just bad writing.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
But in this show, like in the first episode, we have the partner kills himself. Was it suicide? Was it murder? By the end of episode 3, we have a pretty, or at least episode 4, we're pretty confident that he was like lured into suicide by the woman. Like,
very likely.
That question seems to be answered. It's not really like, we don't know how she did it, but we're pretty sure that she leads these people to suicide. I mean, there's overwhelming evidence to support it.
And that question feels answered, but as I was saying before, like the question that seems to raise is like, what does she use in order to convince them that death is the way? Like, that is now the question foremost on my mind.
Who is she operating for? Like,
very likely that mayor, but
we don't know. And she seems, the way the story is presenting her is definitely as a much bigger force than any of the people she seems to be working for.
Absolutely.
Like, she is going to be more important. Like there's a lot of mystery still to come, but again, some questions are answered, and one that I was surprised by, that I thought was going to be a mystery kind of dangling under our nose, was the new assistant girl. Our main character, he loses his partner in the first episode. He also loses the other cop who was helping him interrogate in episode 3 because he gets allured into jumping off a building with all the other people. So now he has this girl who's his assistant, who's like, she kind of reminds me of the autistic girl from Godzilla, Shin Godzilla. Have you seen Shin Godzilla?
I have not.
Okay, well, she's like a very robotic, like logical, like she also has a very strong sense of justice, and like she's just such an overtly perfect partner for the main character that it was suspicious to me. So I immediately thought she must be Ai.
The girl, of course. That's what we both thought, I'm sure. Yeah.
And there's all these moments where she's like kind of watching the main character out of the side of her eye. Like it's hinting that there's more to her, but seemingly by the end of episode 5, we have confirmed it can't be her because he's standing next to her while Ai calls him on the phone. So this is another place where, like, they raised a question, they had it lingering there, and I thought for sure that, it felt like she was lulling him into a false sense of security by giving him so many easy answers. And maybe that's still the case. Maybe there is more to her. She doesn't have to be Ai for her to be a part of some kind of conspiracy.
I mean, that's true. But I can't help but noticing that, like, there are literally 2 female characters in this entire story. And it is Ai turns out to have been every woman we've met up to that point. And then there's, I can't remember her new name, but like the new assistant lady who's good and justice and all that good stuff. And but like the show seems to have something to say on the nature of femininity through the character of Ai, at least to a degree. Because like the one character, this is a bit cheesy, But when we find out like what all those F's written on that one mystery page, it was F for femoid or for female. And so it seems that like that doctor guy seems to have been so caught up in what we learn in like episode 5 or whatever that Ai is just like so alluring. There's just something about Ai that compels you to. I mean, we can talk about that a little bit. Yeah. In her youth, Ai did something she spoke to these guys in her class. They all felt they had been raped because she's like so provocative that it feels like she's getting inside you somehow, which is a little bit weird. I don't quite understand the mechanics of that. But
it was really interesting because like when they present the character Ai in episode 2, this is another great use of red herrings. And consider, after watching the first episode, I'm going to assume you have, if you're listening at this point. Either you don't care. This conversation is probably kind of incomprehensible if you don't watch the show. Because there's so much going on, and your understanding changes so much episode by episode. By the end of episode 1, start of episode 2, you're thinking, oh, this is an Epstein thing. Like, this is about, sex traffic between powerful people. They're murdering each other. This is an Epstein thing. So they get Ai, not knowing it's her, not knowing that she is all the different women. They're interrogating her, and the way she answers questions is as though she's trying to give them as much information as she thinks she safely could. It feels kind of like she's signaling, I can't, like there's parts where he asks her questions that she literally laughs at. Like, how could you possibly think I could answer that question?
Madam, did you have sexual relations with those gentlemen? And she just laughs at that question.
Right. And she even asks, like, well, what if I was in love with them? Then it doesn't matter if I had sex with them, right? And he's like, there's no way you're in love with these three
old men at the same time,
who you don't remember their names, So, like, there's an element of she's fucking with them, but there's also an element of it feels almost like a cry for help. And it's at that point, it's like, I don't know what team she's ultimately going to be on, because even though the main character perceives her as like this incredibly evil woman, just because of the fact that she is so manipulative and so deceitful with the way she talks, and she can control a conversation so well, we have no real evidence to suggest what her ultimate goal is, whether she's a good guy or a bad guy. We really have no idea. She's so mysterious, which of course makes her a pretty interesting character, especially when we find out that it seems as though what her particular power is that she just has such like control over her body and her speech that she can, and over like knowing how to communicate with other people, that she can like just instantly, particularly men who are allured by her because she has a really incredible body and she knows how to use it. She could basically plant whatever idea she wants in your head. It seems to be the case.
She's got that toxic femininity down, dude. She's got it down.
We learned from her uncle in a scene that I thought was great and hilarious and erotic in its own way. Her uncle was supposed to psych evaluate her after she had apparently said something to these 8 boys that made them feel raped. And then she just walks into his office, and just by wearing like a slutty school outfit and just,
normal
walking
outfit.
in this, but just the way she wears it, the way she walks in this particular way into the room is so hypersexual that it's obvious to him that this context would only make any sense if she is telling him to fuck her.
Let's just take a moment. Let's just take a moment, because a lot of people are absolutely retarded on this point and point out that something like 90 to 95% of human interaction is nonverbal. So like it is, I just, for those retards out there in the audience, I just want to be super clear that you can convey sexual intent and these sorts of things, at least at a subtle level. He didn't just by your looks, just by your gestures, by a touch or something, by the way you stand. And so through all these mechanisms, I feel like a lot of our viewers may be retarded and stunted in understanding some of these factors, but this is totally natural human behavior, and his arousal as a response to it is totally normal behavior.
Well, that's the thing. That's how she manipulates him, is that everything about her body language is screaming like she's basically acting like she's in a porn. Like this is a situation you would find in a porno. She's acting like she's in a porno. She's like trying to put this maximum level of like sexual flirtation in the air.
Hey, bro, what are you doing here?
Right. But she deliberately doesn't say anything. Doesn't actually touch him, doesn't actually initiate anything. She doesn't say anything. She just comes in, flirts in this way, and then just leaves, essentially. Like, after getting him to a point where he's like so aroused that he's like coming in his pants just from being in front of her. But like, when he thinks about the fact that like, yeah, I felt all of those feelings towards her, but that's my niece and she's in middle school, and and she did not actually say anything, and I just like feel this overpowering urge to fuck her, so he just like quits his practice and moves away.
We're dealing at this point at this point we're dealing with some relatively taboo things that a lot of people are not comfortable talking about, but the reality is that there are women who are below the legal age of consent who can be extremely attractive. And when you feel an urge in this way, I mean, I absolutely love that this guy didn't fuck her, because that would be the obvious thing that you would expect to happen in the scene. He just feels so guilty that he even wanted to. Like his adopted niece or whatever. He's so guilty by that. He felt the need to just totally separate his life, move away, and start over somewhere else. And, I mean, so, like, I on the one hand, I'm totally with this guy on, I understand why he felt this way.
I think he acted as responsibly as he could have done. Like, the main characters even tell him, like, you didn't do anything. And he's like, but, like...
Who are cops. But that's when they say it. That's when they say, or he says, look, I know I didn't legally do anything wrong, but some bad things aren't against the law. And I felt in my heart I was being a bad person by giving in to these urges, even to like feel the amount of like cravings or desire I did. And that's real shit, man. That's real shit. And I thought that was beautifully. Imagine you're a father with an incredibly hot daughter. That's gotta be just a horrible situation to be in. I mean, how do you live your life there? You can't control how you feel, man. And I hope I never am in that situation, because I just can't believe how awkward it would be and how shitty it would be. Or like, even if you're like a son with a really hot mom, like that can happen all the time, right? That's gotta be extremely uncomfortable for everybody involved. So I'm just saying, these things happen, and thank God I live in a society where we can talk about them in an open way without being shamed in media such as this.
Or so we think.
Or so we hope.
Get to the comment section. I'm trying to think back if there's anything we missed plot-wise, because again, so much goes on. I mean, it went from being like the Epstein killer, who's like, are people committing suicide? Are they getting murdered? What is the connection of the government to it? And then just at the start of episode 3, when we find out that all of this is like basically just planned by this Shinichi movement that's like, we're deliberately trying to like manipulate things behind the scenes because we want to push this specific idea of what the city is supposed to be, which is this experimental nation where people are going to make up new laws and we're really going to get the populace to participate, which is an interesting idea. I mean, they're basically trying to create like a super unregulated, unchecked like government and
to a degree. I mean, they might try a system of government that's like extremely authoritarian theory, because they could just try whatever they want. And I mean, what this really reminds me of is fucking BioShock 1 Rapture, where like the people broke off and made their own society under the sea, and like in that they just tried objectivism and they explored how it could go horribly wrong with like no regulation and unrestrained capitalism and all that crazy anarcho-capitalist shit. But I mean, it's similar in a sense to that, in that they're gonna just what's different about this is that right now they're in like the planning stages of a society, whereas in like BioShock it was exploring a failed society and seeing like where it had gone wrong, whereas now I mean, it could go well.
The insanity in this show is that it's in Japan, so like even though the city has its own laws, it still is Japan. So, assumably, Japanese law applies to it to some extent, and like
I guess.
One of the most interesting things about this whole suicide plot, and this is what really leaves me questioning where is this all going, because So at the end of episode 3, it's announced that suicide is now legal. In episode 4, we find out right away that 200 people committed suicide since this announcement, like a week ago. So immediately it's caused an uptick in suicide, but not like crazy
Only
amounts.
4 times the normal amount, which was less than I thought. Yeah.
And so there's this spike in suicides, and they're all kind of sitting around questioning, like, well, like, obviously this guy inciting all this suicide is bad, right? And then they're like, well, I don't know.
It's open to debate.
Is it? Like, did the people who committed suicide all want to die? Like, there's lots of countries that have legal suicide on some level, just not like this. Now, this way of doing it is obviously bad. Like, everybody in the show can tell this is not a good idea because it's just going to inspire people to commit suicide on mass.
I mean, I've talked about this a few times
like,
recently, but like, there's I always bring up this one episode of Star Trek and the movie Midsommar that just came out. Those both explore in like an episode in the movie. A culture in which there is a age, when you reach that age, you voluntarily commit suicide as a way to avoid becoming a burden to your society. And among other things...
Logan's Run is a movie basically about that.
Oh, yeah?
Everybody
Okay.
has to be killed at 30.
That ceiling's a little bit low. Maybe we could go a little bit higher than that. But, I mean, I think there's a fascinating conversation to be had about that. And, I mean, yeah, like, the show clearly says, and I agree with, our views of death are massively shaped by, like, in our case in the West, like our Judeo-Christian founding, like, of America and of the West in general. But like other cultures, we have a pretty negative relationship with society in the West, which has spilled over to Japan, which is largely westernized as well. But not as much because, like, for example, in Japan, you know what? There was one conversation where they were talking to that like head political guy with like the Donald Trump haircut, whatever that guy's name is. I noticed that while they were discussing suicide after this, law had been put in place, there's a painting of Sakura. Or rather, they had like a Sakura tree in the room or something. And what does Sakura represent? Well, it represents like the traditional Japanese philosophical belief that inspired things like the code of Bushido and the samurai, that life is ephemeral. And when the samurai would fight in battle, they were supposed to have accepted before the battle that, like, we live a short, tragic, imperfect existence, and if we die in this battle, that's just life. That's just how life goes. So there's long been a tradition in Japan to, like, accept the tragedy and the short, ephemeral nature of life, and the way that spills into this is, could be explored in interesting ways.
They have the term mono no aware, or the death of things, the
That's
transience of all things, a major part of their art.
Play and Sekiro, guys. It touches on these themes.
Yeah. It's cool as well because the show is a very Japanese show. Like, it makes sure to incorporate things that are very distinctly Japanese. There's a whole scene where they have like a kendo
battle to
dojo
unwind.
inside.
I mean, if this was America,
building.
it'd be me in the weight room pounded out some bench
Right.
presses instead.
And there's also like the scene with the kid when he put up the YouTube video.
Had to have the mask on.
Wanted...
Yeah.
Right. He has like a Power Ranger mask on or something like that.
Because in Japan you're
one
not
of
allowed
those
to share a
masks they
face
would
or
wear.
something. Yeah.
Well, it's not that you're not allowed; that people just don't.
Oh, okay.
But like, yeah, the kid's, he's covering his face up as Japanese YouTubers would do. So, there's lots of little things like that, some of which might not even make sense if you don't know Japanese culture. But, I like that it's so Japanese because it explores, like, well, how is Japan specifically going to react to this stuff? And, of course, suicide being a very pressing issue in Japan.
The fact that it's exacerbated by these policies is particularly relevant in Japan with its declining population and all that shit. So, yeah.
So, like, so after we find out, like, that there's been this jump in suicide, we learn about a poll that was done to ask the Japanese people, like, do you agree with suicide being legal? And only like 3.5% of the population agrees that suicide should be legal in any way.
Right.
And they speculate that most of those people are probably just thinking about euthanasia, which is legal in a bunch of countries. And so this immediately raises an interesting question that, okay, well, we've made suicide legal, but it's an extremely unpopular law. Like, right out the gate, people are not really in favor of it. A lot of the world is confused. The guy who instituted it has immediately gone into hiding, even though he is the mayor as of now. And the mayor, he announces, we're going to have this big referendum, essentially. Everybody is going to get to vote on whether or not I continue to be mayor, purely on the basis of this suicide law.
Well, technically, Digi, it's not about voting for the mayor. It's about voting for who's going to be in the parliament of their new region, and that's going to determine which law, since that's the legislator, if that law stays or if it goes. But
the bottom line is that, like, he's going to have this debate with all these other people, and if he can somehow convince the Japanese populace that they are okay with this suicide law, then it gets to stay, assumably. And if not, it goes. And does he stop being mayor if the law gets repealed? Like,
I'm not sure about the specific laws or.
But, like, so this raises the question of, like, what is his goal? Because, like, if his goal is to actually keep this law instituted, then it's a huge uphill battle. He has to argue with all these people. He has to convince this country that is not really sold on it. I don't know how many votes he has to get, but maybe it's not his goal to win. Maybe it's about proving a different point. You know, like, maybe it's just to show how this experimental system works. Of, like, yeah, you can pass something outrageous seeming into law that, people at just a thought can't explain why this is a bad thing. But once you've had time to, like, argue about it and think about it, maybe it'll be obvious why suicide is bad. And we'll say, okay, we ratify, not having this law. Like, this is something we understand now why suicide's not allowed. I don't know. I don't know what his plan is, which is interesting.
I hadn't thought of any of that possibility. That makes sense. My approach, or my thinking of how it's going to go is more straightforward. I think that they've set us up with that low percentage of people accepting for a huge moment in the debate that's going to happen in, like, the next episode or two, presumably, in which I suspect what'll happen is a huge change in public perception through some argument that he makes. And that's what I'm excited. I want to see ideas debated in the show. So, like, that appeals to me. I hope that's what happens. It could go a totally different direction. Maybe he's intending to fail because they've been misdirecting us all over the place. But I just wonder, at some point they have to run out of surprises at some point and just continue the plot that they've set out eventually. Right. I mean, maybe we're not there yet, but
because my sort of assumption, and I'll say that the novel series this is based on, as far as I know, it has, like, 3 books so far. I don't know how much of each book is represented in the episodes, but I do know that the first 3 episodes were, like, a first arc, according to Wikipedia. They also changed the OP as of episode 4. Right. So, like... Right. I doubt that was a whole book because it was fucking, I don't know, maybe it was. Maybe they cut stuff out because it was very dense, But whatever the case may be, I get the feeling that this mayor is, like, the first of many people who are going to try out different laws in this city. Like, the way that they're kind of setting up the older candidate who had bumped up the mayor, he basically says, he gives this weird kind of speech where he says, like, that guy is trying to go up against me, like, as a politician, and I don't think he's good enough, Like, he thinks he's going to beat this guy at his game. And so what I'm ultimately wondering is, are they going to prove that the suicide is a bad idea? Can this guy? And then another dude's going to take over, and then we're going to explore the next idea. Like, is that what this show is?
Well,
what would society become if we passed this law,
I think that's exactly where we're going, and this is why. Because let us not forget. So we're a man on the street in a city that's going to go totally crazy with the laws, presumably. Right now, we're digging into this suicide thing. I hope that continues. I could see this taking up the whole series of 12 episodes or whatever. Or maybe we'll go into a bunch of different ones. That would be cool too. But regardless, like, we are one cop observing, like, the people who rule this city trying out crazy shit. And I'm not exactly sure if, like maybe Ai is manipulating the current mayor completely, and this is, like, all her master plan in a way to, like, improve the world. She said she wants to, like, be the hero and make the world better for everyone. We still don't know her motivations. There's more to learn about that. But right now we're playing like the role of a prosecutor he just wants justice, but he doesn't know what justice is. But we're observing the city and we're trying to get a handle on, are we making the world worse or better through these machinations of the elites, whoever they may be. And the name of the show, right? The name of the show is Babylon. And what is Babylon? Babylon was the ancient biblical, maybe real, I don't know, civilization. And what did they do in Babylon? Babylon grew so powerful. The people of Babylon became so enraptured with themselves and their own creations that they built the Tower of Babel, which was directly rivaling God. Interesting that there's a giant tower where all the politicians do their business at the very center of Shinichi. And within this tower, they're deciding all these crazy rules for how they want to govern themselves outside of the way anyone's like ever done in history, presumably. This is a law examination series. And what happened at the end of the Tower of Babel story? God himself told them, do not build. You are entering God's territory by building this tower so high and believing that you know better than God, by thinking that your wisdom overcomes mine. And when they continued to build the tower and continued to to enter into God's territory, God found them to have too much fucking hubris. So he destroyed the tower and he destroyed their civilization and like scattered the peoples throughout the world. And that's why we have different languages according to the Bible. And all this is to say that what I see the point of this series being is that this series is about a world, a city of Shinichi that is trying to defy the natural order, to try to go against the order that's been established. Now, I don't know if the series is going to go in a way that I wouldn't really enjoy that much, of just saying, oh, no, everything we've done up to this point, everything like in keeping with God's law, that's just good, and we're just going to do that forever. What I want is an interrogation and a testing like they did in Babylon so many millions of years ago, possibly fictionally or whatever, to see if these experimental things...
Definitely fictionally.
Well, okay, right? Fictional,
no
fair
evidence
enough.
Of Babylon existing.
Hey man, Jesus is my guy. That's all I have to say. But I mean, it seems like the correlation is obvious. The name of the series is Babylon. They're going to be testing things in defiance of God's law, probably, and they're just going to throw shit at the wall. And that's why I believe that you're probably correct. Once you told me that this was like a multiple novel series, this isn't going to be just about suicide. This is going to be about all different fucking kinds of experimental ways of living that hopefully will... It's not a sci-fi series. It's a political series. It's very clear that the thing that we're doing is trying weird laws to see what works. And I mean, like Hitler did.
I think it's worth bringing up that like Kado, the series that came before this, was essentially the story was that like an alien crash landed in Japan, and like on this giant cube thing, and that like sucked a plane into it. And so like there's all these dealings with the Japanese government and like bureaucracy in a way that's similar to the way this show handles that stuff. But ultimately what that show was about was this alien comes bringing free reusable energy to Earth. Okay, and it's about like how will people react to that? Unfortunately, the show then goes in a completely different direction.
That's not good.
In the later half.
Can I just ask, what does it do? What does it do? How does it change in general?
It would be difficult to even describe.
All right, never mind.
It goes really into like the lore of the particular alien. And all
boring. Who would ever give a shit about that? What a mistake. What a mistake. I can already tell. Yeah.
It's weird. I can't even explain it well, but like,
oh my god, how many times can we tell these fucking people what matters is the human heart in conflict with itself? We don't care about fucking ancient alien lore. I mean, it's stupid.
It still was about that. I don't want to get into it.
Okay, all right.
Kato, complicated, weird show. I hated the second half, but I've read at least one person who really liked it and got something out of it. So I'm sure there is something to be gleaned if you really care. But whatever. This show is way more interesting, specifically because it doesn't seem like it has to summarize like end in 12 episodes,
Oh no.
Kado was a show that felt like it had to rush towards having some kind of ending that didn't really answer the core questions of the series. This show seems like it can just keep going. Dude, I don't know if it'll get another anime season.
Yeah, but, who can say? Who can say? But just like Ghost in the Shell, I mean, the thing I've always loved about Ghost in the Shell the most is that, Ghost in the Shell has cyborgs and shit. It's not really even about cyborgs. It's about like society and we've got cyborgs. Now let's explore like a million different like political and psychological implications of this change in all these ways that wouldn't even necessarily require cyborgs. But that's why it's so fucking good. It's just
I mean, this show, like, I think it was wise to hold off for a few episodes before they really revealed what the show was really about. Because
if we watched episode 1 alone or just 2, we'd be like so far behind. We'd be missing so much of the picture.
It was wise of them to do that because of the fact that the actual plot is crazy. This idea that they built this experimental city where they're just going to pass whatever laws, like, how the fuck did they organize that? And like, I think if they had hit you with that out the gate, you'd be a lot more doubtful as to like the intelligence of this show.
Oh, and you know what? On the subject of the intelligence of the show, let me just say, I've been waiting. I wanted to say these 2 things earlier on, but I'll just say them now. It's that at the very beginning, there were 2 things that made me question how good the writing of the show was going to be, and they kind of just became irrelevant, though they were still concerns. One was when that doctor guy first commits suicide. We're in the situation room where they're like investigating, and they have his suicide note, and instead of doing the thing that like any detective would do and read and analyze the fucking note, one of the characters just says about the incredibly important suicide note of the person they're fucking investigating, they just say, "Oh, there's nothing unusual here." And then they move on. I was like, are you fucking shitting me? You're a fucking detective or whatever. Okay, that infuriated me a little bit. And then the next one was after the girl, mysteriously disappears from the interrogation room, and that guy, that other detective, Okobe or whatever, was the one who allowed her to escape. They spend exactly 0 fucking time interrogating either him for how she escaped or like what she did as she was escaping. And those would be like the first fucking things I find out when your key witness escapes. They just send him home after she escapes and they don't ask him any fucking questions, and then he goes and kills himself. I mean, those 2 things made me be like, oh no, this writing is leaving some holes in things that should be obvious if you're realistically thinking about like a police procedural story in any way. But those 2, frankly, large issues aside, in my mind, everything else was pretty great. And, we went so many places beyond that, so
when it
doesn't
comes
matter
to
anymore.
her leaving the room, I'm willing to believe that there was an interrogation of that guy off screen or something. But
well, that's fair, but they could have definitely... Okay, see, I thought of that as well, but, like... Even if that was true, the information that they could have gotten from that guy in that interrogation, like, surely some details would remain of how she escaped, but that is saved as a reveal of, like, her methodology, like, later in the next episode, and they really could have had that answer if they asked this guy any fucking questions. So, I mean, to me, that seemed a little bit lazy in the writing, but
I mean, I'm just so impressed that even the show is like about what it's about. Like, I'm thinking about how the last police procedural that came out that was anything like this was Copcraft from last season, and Copcraft was it was also based on a novel series, but that one was a cop in a city where like aliens from all over the multiverse had come to Earth, and the society was very different, but he's basically just a beat cop investigating like a larger conspiracy of like this drug trade and some degree of human trafficking going on amidst these alien creatures and like fairies and stuff, basically. And like that show is fairly entertaining. It had some similar scenes to this one. The main character's partner dies right at the start of the show in an unexpected way. There are like big reveals and plot twists and stuff. But like Copcraft, the nature of the characters and scenarios is like deliberately generic, I would almost say. Like, it's trying to feel like a beat cop story with this overarching conspiracy. The characters and their interactions are goofy and cliched, and like there's enjoyable things about the show, even though the production was a total clusterfuck and I ended up dropping it after episode 4. But like it just had nothing intriguing. It had stuff that was entertaining in the moment that made you go like, okay, they're delivering plot twists, and maybe you feel some level of emotion just from like a scene being well done. But like this show takes all of that stuff to just such a way vastly more interesting place where it's asking broad social questions. It's got like the complexity of the scenario is interesting. It's not quite convoluted because you can always keep track of what's happening, but it is very complex. And the fact that everybody has such different motivations and, you know, is really doing their own thing, opens you up to so many possibilities. The characters are mature adults taking the story seriously. There's no goofy scenes, and like, not to say that I, you know, would dislike having some kind of levity in the show, but I just don't think it's necessary to keep the show entertaining.
Yeah,
like,
not every show is built for it.
It's entertaining the way it is. Every conversation adds some kind of information, I'm very happy that there's scenes where the main character just like meets with his journalism buddy or the other cop who he's friends with, and they just kind of like very quickly summarize what just happened, you know?
Right.
Because sometimes I needed that, you know? Like, fuck, there's so much going on. So much to keep track of and to rethink about, but it doesn't go overboard with that. It always feels like it's moving along. Every episode has had some kind of huge reveal that recontextualized your understanding of the situation. So, yeah, it's consistently great. And like, I think about things like, who are the main characters in this show? We've got this prosecuting attorney who's very self-serious. He's got a strong sense of justice, great understanding of the law, and like who he's surrounded with. Like, if I were to describe the character designs in this show to somebody, I would have to say, like, well, there's pretty boys, kind of. Like, you've got the main character's kind of a pretty boy. His friends are kind of pretty. Like, the characters around his age.
These characters honestly remind me a lot of the characters from Stand My Hero's Piece of Truth. Both in work and in their fucking appearance. They look like them.
That's what I was kind of trying to get to, is like, you think about Stand My Hero's Piece of Truth, and it's like, this show was made with pretty boys being the first thought. Like, we're going to make a show full of beautiful guy characters. What can they be doing? Drug busts or whatever.
Drug things. Yeah, that's it.
With Babylon, they're like, we have this intriguing story with characters of all different ages, all different like stripes of, you know, personality and jobs. But like, we need to have at least some like attractive, interesting characters who you want to like look at, you know. So you've got the main character and his couple of buddies who are his age. You got the journalist and the other cop who are also kind of pretty boys, but like, they, you know, they have reason to interact. They talk about work. These couple of guys, because they're tangentially related to the plot, they're probably not going to die. They might be around longer, you know, but like, even characters who seem main-ish regularly die, you know, like the guy's assistant dies at the end of episode 1, who had like some of the most dialogue in the episode, you know.
Sure does.
Like, you never would have expected that guy to just suddenly die. So like, you're always on your toes about who's going to live or die, you know, and there's a huge variety of character designs and types. There's a lot of older characters. I would say I wish there was more women in the show, since there's literally only like two. Literally two. And they're both really hot. But, you know, not that I'm complaining, but, you know, we have a much better spread of guy characters.
Well, you know, our female characters are really narrowed down to, I think, just there's an evil one or perceived evil one, and then there's the good justice one, and that's all we need. And I've got to say,
perceived good justice,
the perceived good justice, the perceived evil one. I mean, it sounds like there's going to be complexity going on here,
or
and
maybe they're the same person.
Oh shit! And I mean, I've been loving Ai so much. She's kind of the most mysterious character. It would be fascinating to me to hear if she was puppeting like the mayor guy. It seems to me like she's above him, like she's the top level person here. Like, she's got the most intrigue, the most mystery, and like possibly like evil stuff going on, like not almost like magical, her abilities. So she seems like the main foil to our main character above anybody else. And I mean, I'm just, at the end of the day, I just hope that someone has the courage to make an AMV of her once the show is done to this song. I want to hear a fucking AMV to fucking Toxic for this bitch, because I'm loving her and she's so fucking cool. And I've been blown away by her stalking ass blue hair. Okay, that's enough of the song there. Don't you know that you're toxic? I'm way into Ai, and I cannot wait to see more of her as the narrative progresses.
She's
I want a
really
fucking figure of her right next to my stalking figure, because they've got the same hair, and I love it.
She's hot. She's got a really interesting smile.
A lot of lip detail.
Her real intentions.
Ooh, yeah, she's got me hooked, bro. I think I feel the toxic femininity hooking me as I'm being raped. I'm being raped. Stop it!
I'm loving it.
I don't consent. I'm lying. I loved it. All right.
All right, last thing I want to touch on, just
Sure.
bells and whistles, because like the
Actually,
aesthetic of the
I'm
show.
sorry. I'm sorry. Can you pause? Can you restart with that? I just have to step out of the room for 1 sec. Just give me 1 sec. I think I need to let Michelle in, and then we'll pick up. Okay, 1 sec. 1 sec. That bitch was freezing outside for 20 minutes. Okay.
Damn.
All right. Okay. You were saying your bells and whistles. Just restart. We'll cut it or whatever.
So if you just looked at this show on the surface, I don't think the aesthetic would immediately grab you.
Absolutely true. Was not into it up front. It had to be good despite that.
It's not a beautiful show, but it does have a lot of interesting directing. It's got lots of weird shot compositions or experimental stuff. Particularly one shot that I remember loving was from the inside of Ai's mouth. Like,
yes, that was good
her
stuff.
Her mouth like is the frame.
How about when in that same scene where she's talking about, what if I did fuck those guys, and we see her hands jacking off a ghost dick. I mean, that's bold. That's bold shit.
There's scenes. There's all these transitions of like kaleidoscopes.
Yep.
Just like general trippy imagery that's sewn in to give certain scenes like a weird or unnerving feeling, or just make certain stuff memorable.
Can I point out one more, which was just when the uncle was describing his history with her. I mean, there was the scene where there's like 30 of her like gathered around him, but then at the end, as he's describing that she's evil, there's like this weird trippy image. Again, it was like kaleidoscope with her like moving through it. I feel like the kaleidoscope effect like represents her to some degree or something, but I mean, there were some shots that were beautiful and really good.
It does a good job of conveying the thriller atmosphere, to have these kind of trippy, psychological, weird moments in there, even if it's not like totalizing throughout the show. And the music is great. I was
hoping you would say the same thing. I was big into it.
The OP is really good. It's only like 25 seconds long for whatever reason. But it's interesting. The EDs, there's been 2 already. They're both solid songs. But yeah, just the music throughout the show. There's a bunch of songs I'd like to rap over. Some interesting like trap beats that come in there and stuff. Some great piano and like drums and just all kinds of interesting tracks.
Hey, at the end of the opening, I was curious if you were able to tell, because I listened to several times to try to make it out. At the end of the opening, there's a woman's voice whispering and an echo. I could not make out what the words were for the life of me. Did you catch that?
I didn't even notice.
Oh, actually, and let me say about that, because I have another point, which is just that woman's whispering voice there. I mean, I feel like it represents I, because during the uncle's flashback, during the song that's playing, as we're getting his like, oh my god, my fucking niece is so fucking hot, bro, and he's having these flashbacks and stuff. Like, the song that's playing there has like that woman's whispery voice from the opening, it sounds like, and it seemed to me symbolic of Ai's presence, and I just thought that was a really sick touch. I was way into it.
Super interesting, if true. But yeah, the music and interesting visuals definitely set a lot of the scenes with really interesting tones. And the show was always fun to watch. I mean, like, regardless of even if it's just characters standing around talking, I was never bored. I had a good time. I like pretty much everything about this show. I mean, like, aside from the fact that, again, the visuals are not the most engaging all the time, it's not a show that, like, immediately hooks you with, like, oh, I relate to these characters, or I want to draw pictures of them. I love the artwork. Like, no, this is a show about the writing, first and foremost, and the writing is super interesting, and the fact that the visuals and music can keep up with it is good enough, you know? I really think this show is, like, right now, I'm thinking like a strong 8 to a light 9 in terms of my score.
I feel about the same. I'm probably right about the same place. Somewhere in the 8s. Probably somewhere in the 8s. I think mid-8.
All right, well, I think we're pretty much done talking about this show. I've been Digibro, who you can find over on the Digibro channel and on Twitter. Links in the description.
I'm the Best Guy Ever, and you can find me on the YouTube channel, Best Guy Ever, on my Twitter. Links in the description, and give me money on Patreon. Be very much appreciated. Because we're not making any right now for these fucking videos on this channel, so help us survive.
Yeah.
Specifically me.
We're close, though. This channel has already been doing so well.
Yep.
It's probably going to get monetized pretty soon, assuming, I mean, God knows how long
we need
YouTube
like a
will
month
take
or
to
something,
actually
but,
approve us for monetization, but we're getting close to our watch hour requirement. So stick around for more KHANTEHNT. Share it with your friends. Let people know we're doing this. We're covering all the good current anime. See you around.
Bye.
KHANTENT!